The road leading to the house was barely more than a gravel scar across the frostbitten fields, a thin gray vein feeding into a property that had outlived its name. Locals called it the Vale House, though no one could recall when it last had a living Vale inside. When Mara arrived, dusk was dissolving into a colorless haze, and the house stood waiting with the patience of something that had already measured every second of her approach. The brass numbers on the gatepost read 77. The mailbox door hung open, unwilling to close. When she turned the old key that had arrived in the mail a week earlier, the door sighed as though unlocking meant waking. Dust floated in golden beams, the air smelled of linen and long storage. The silence that followed her inside was not empty, it was listening. On the mantel above the cold fireplace sat a clock with convex glass and a cracked face. Its hands pointed to 11:61. Mara stared, assuming her tired eyes had blurred the numbers, but there it was, 61, carved as though the clockmaker had decided time needed extra room. When she tapped the glass, the second hand stuttered, then slid past the 12 and into that impossible space, ticking with calm defiance. Outside, wind rose and dropped again, like breath caught between ribs. She told herself it was only a trick of old gears and poorer sleep. But the longer she stood there, the more she felt the rhythm inside her chest adjusting to match the clock's new arithmetic. The rooms were cold but neat, as if the previous owner, her great-aunt Elspeth, had simply stepped out between minutes and never returned. Every wall held a clock. Mantel clocks, wall clocks, small silver ones shaped like hearts. None told the same time, yet each worked. The house ticked in chorus, a heartbeat broken into dozens of competing hearts. In the foyer, on a table beneath a fern-patterned wallpaper, lay a sealed envelope with her name. The handwriting was sharp, formal, the way people wrote when they expected paper to outlive them. Inside was a short letter and a brass winding key shaped like a trefoil. "If you are reading this," it began, "the house has chosen you. Remember, ours are rooms. Do not win what you cannot afford to finish. If the foyer clock stops, leave. If the kitchen clock chimes 13, do not eat. If the attic clock asks for your birthday, lie. The house counts us. Count it back." Beneath the signature, one final note: "Midnight lives in the stairwell. Don't be there when it passes." Mara folded the letter slowly, as if the paper might bite. In the hall, a tall grandfather clock leaned against the wall like a crooked spine. When she touched its pendulum, it began to swing. Somewhere above her, another clock answered with a faint metallic tick, and another after that, until every room joined in. The air thickened with sound, steady, ancient, alive. That night she explored the kitchen. The window showed only her reflection and the dim suggestion of trees. A schoolhouse clock over the back door ticked too fast. The moment her hand brushed the table, the smell of toast and lemon filled the room. On the counter sat a plate of buttered bread, fresh and steaming. She froze. It hadn't been there a second earlier. Her pulse pounded so loud she almost didn't hear the kettle whistle. When she blinked, the bread had cooled. The clock had returned to a normal rhythm. The house, apparently, had finished its demonstration. Sleep was a negotiation. Every hour had its own noise: the slow cough of the parlor clock, the impatient rattle of one in the hallway, the whispered synchrony when they all agreed on something she couldn't hear. At some point she dreamed of walking through the stairwell and seeing darkness pour down the steps like liquid smoke. When she woke, the air still tasted of midnight. Days blurred, and the house learned her shape. She discovered a carriage clock on the landing frozen forever at 11:59. The air around it was warmer, as if the space between minutes leaked heat. She sat on the stairs once and watched the house breathe through its pipes and timbers. When the clock trembled, the world paused, and a cold river of air rushed down past her, the sensation of something invisible passing, heavy and deliberate. Midnight had moved through the stairwell. She understood the warning now. In the attic she found boxes labeled "Stop Things." Inside were photographs, the house's rooms across decades, the same walls wearing different decades of wallpaper, the same clocks frozen at different times. Each picture bore not a date but a timestamp: 4:12, 2:03, 12 o'clock, 11 hours 61 minutes. At the bottom was a picture of a little girl with a dog, standing in the entry hall. The time mark was blank. On the back, in Elspeth's hand, someone had written, "When the house forgets to count, don't remind it." A skeleton clock stood nearby, its gears exposed, its plaque reading "Ask politely." On a breath that misted in the cold, Mara whispered, "May I have 1 hour to go backward?" The gears shivered, then began turning not backward but sideways. For a second, everything in the attic brightened. She heard laughter, the echo of a life too old to still exist, and then the sound collapsed. When she looked again, the gears spun normally, and a note lay on the beam, "If it asks for your birthday, lie." The house loves anniversaries. Each night, she felt watched by the house's patience. Time itself had moods. Noon arrived suddenly one evening, light flooding the kitchen even though it was dark outside. The air smelled of coffee and butter. A warm plate waited on the table. The clock struck 12 once, twice, and then stopped. When she refused to touch the food, the light dimmed back to twilight, the smell faded, and the clock resumed at 11:59. The house respected boundaries, if reminded of them. One morning, she found that the foyer clock had stopped completely. Remembering the letter, she opened the front door, but the wind outside was so sharp it drove her back. On the wall beside the door, her name had appeared in chalk, written in Elspeth's hand. Slowly, she erased it with her thumb. The pendulum stirred and began again. The house, apparently satisfied, let her stay. The following week, the attic clock finally spoke. The voice wasn't sound but vibration in her bones, a metallic whisper asking, "When were you born?" She hesitated, then lied with conviction, "January 7th. The clock hummed, pleased. Somewhere below, another clock chimed acceptance. The lie had worked. The house believed her. That night she dreamed of her great-aunt sitting by the parlor fire, writing in a journal. When Mara approached, Elspeth looked up and said, "Houses keep time for us when we can't." The words followed her into waking, soft as dust. From then on, Mara decided to count with the house. She marked each clock with chalk labels, kept notes, catalogued their moods. She discovered Elspeth's diaries, filled with observations that sounded like prayers. Tuesday repeated its second half. When Ansel left for the war, the kitchen stayed mourning for a week. The last entry read, "The hour you're owed is never lost, only waiting for courage." In the mantel clock's base, Mara found a hidden pocket watch wrapped in silk. Inside was a small mirror instead of hands, engraved, "Hold 1 hour here." When she opened it, her reflection stared back, warped and frightened. She whispered, "I'd like the hour before I stopped believing in second chances." The mirror fogged. The house grew very still. Then the mantel clock ticked once, showing 12 exactly, as if time had forgiven her for something she hadn't realized she'd done. The following evening, thunder rolled across the fields. The house seemed almost cheerful, its clocks in fragile harmony. At midnight, the air in the stairwell moved differently, not cold this time, but warm, like a breath of relief. Mara stood at the landing, eyes closed, letting it pass through her. When she opened them again, she saw the chalk mark of her name on the wall fading on its own. The house, for once, was forgetting kindly. By spring, she'd grown used to its rules. Noon brought brief light, midnight traveled the stairs like a rumor, the attic asked no more questions. She even invited her sister to visit, promising a house that behaved better than it looked. When Tamsin arrived, she joked that it smelled like haunted furniture and lemon polish. The clocks all ticked politely, pretending to be ordinary. That evening, as the sisters sat drinking tea, one of the clocks stopped again, the foyer clock, silent as stone. They stared at each other. "If it stops, leave," Mara said softly. "But maybe it's just resting." The hands had vanished, leaving only the second hand ticking stubbornly. She stood, counted her breath, and began naming the hours backward, 12, 11, 10, until the missing hands reappeared. The clock resumed. The house exhaled. Her sister laughed shakily, but Mara knew it wasn't luck. The house simply needed to be counted back. That night, after Tamsin slept, Mara wandered through the rooms one last time. Each clock kept a different truth, the kitchen's eternal noon, the parlor's slow dusk, the attic's quiet aside. In the hall, the mantel clock read 11:59, ticking peacefully. She opened the pocket watch again. The mirror showed nothing, only her reflection, steady now. She smiled. The house no longer frightened her, it needed her as much as she needed it. When dawn came, frost glittered across the orchard, and the clocks all struck at once, different numbers, same rhythm. For the first time, they sounded like laughter. She stood on the porch and whispered to the air, "You can keep the hours, just not the days." The wind rose, gentle and approving. Somewhere inside, the dandelion she had kept on the mantel released a single seed into the air. It floated through the open window, across the yard, and into the sunlight. The house counted that, too. And Mara counted it back.